Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Robin, and welcome to my talk, Hacking the Airwaves. So today I want to sort of take all of you through my journey as to how I started looking at radio frequency hacking and sort of giving you some insight as to what it means to look at radio signals from a security perspective. This talk is then also hopefully going to raise some security awareness around the topic. So who am I? As I mentioned, my name is Robin. I'm a cybersecurity consultant at MWR Cybersec, and my main focus is actually application security, where I started looking at radio frequency hacking as a hobby in my very first year. But then where did this actually all start? Because signals is kind of a esoteric type of concept. And I do think that it sort of started when, in my university years, where we had a lot of exposure to signals and signal processing, things like that. And in my final year project, I was tasked to build a synthetic aperture radar. This allowed me to really dive into the fundamentals of signal processing. Now, taking that information to a cybersecurity consultancy, I thought to myself, well, they taught me how to think like an attacker. So what if I look at radio frequencies as an attacker? With that said, I immediately went to my mom's Mazda and started hacking straight away. So for this talk, we're going to look at the following agenda, starting with tooling, some automotive cyber attacks, more RF attacks, and then closing remarks. Tooling. So when you're looking at radio frequency hacking, these are some of the tools you might come across. We've got the Hacker F1, Flipper 0, Proxmark RD4, RTL, SDL, and there's much more. But at the end of the day, all of these tools are essentially just radio receivers and radio transmitters. Nothing real special about them. And all of these are tuned into a specific radio frequency that you can operate on. And when we're talking about radio frequency hacking, it's essentially anything between 20 kilohertz and 300 gigahertz. And in that range, there's a wider range of applications. For example, we've got RFID, NFC, key fobs and remotes, Wi-Fi, GSM, and GPS. For my research specifically, I looked at the communication between the key fob and then the actual car. The problem I ran into is I had no idea how any of this works, and I had no idea how the key actually does its thing. So then I took the key fob to a spectrum analyzer where I literally just used the Hacker F1 and pressed the button a few times, of which I saw signals that looks like that. And at this stage, well, I also didn't really know what this meant. So I saw two distinct peaks in the actual signal that I was capturing. And just to note, this is sort of literally the raw signal displayed in the frequency domain. So the horizontal graph bar here would be the frequencies, and we can see we've captured this key fob at 433 megahertz. But now, of course, I needed to dive a little bit deeper in terms of what does the signal actually mean. Well, turns out that signals makes use of digital modulation, and digital modulation is essentially a technique that allows you to represent binary data in the actual structure of a signal. For example, we've got there the top part being the digital data being sent through, and then let's say we're talking about amplitude shift keying. If the amplitude of the signal is higher or larger, that's going to represent all of the ones in the signal. And when it's lower, it's going to represent all of the zeros. However, if we look at frequency shift keying, where it's FSK, here the higher frequency part of the signal is going to represent the ones, and then the lower frequency part of the signal is going to represent the zeros. Taking this information back to the actual signal, we can see here that looking at the two peaks, this signal might have been using FSK. Because if we can look at the sort of right-hand side of the signal, we can see the higher frequency portion of the signal, and then the left peak would have been the lower frequency portion of the signal. At this point, I was feeling extremely confident because I now know everything about key fob communication because I was able to understand this is a 1 and this is a 0. So I thought to myself, okay, I want to attack my mom's Mazda. How can I do that? I thought about, okay, if I were to capture a key fob signal, what happens if I replay that signal? Will I now be able to unlock the car or maybe have a permanent key to it? This didn't work. And I was sort of back at step one. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing. How does this work? And it turns out there's something called rolling codes. I'm sure all of you have heard that with your garage remotes these days and your key fobs. There are rolling codes being sent along with it. And these rolling codes are meant to prevent replay attacks. So how do rolling codes prevent replay attacks? Rolling codes are essentially randomly generated values that's sent along with each signal to ensure that the signal being sent is unique. Because each signal is unique, it allows the car to actually determine which rolling codes it has already seen and which it hasn't. With that is what allows it to actually prevent replay attacks. But the rolling codes itself, how does that communication between the key fob and the car now work? So if we take the car and the key fob, the car is going to have a pseudo-random number generator and the key as well, where both of them is going to have the same seed. This is what we mean by the car and the key fob is in sync. So the car is going to have a list of valid rolling codes. That's what we can see over there in the right-hand side. That's going to be your list of valid rolling codes, and that's stored inside of the cars. It's called a rolling window. And whenever the key fob generates a random number, it's going to send it to the car, and because they have the same seed value, the car can actually expect that the correct value is going to be sent through and the car will unlock. But why is there a rolling window? So when you're out of range and you press the button a few times, the car isn't going to hear the signal or receive it, and if you didn't have a rolling window or a list of valid answers, you're going to DOS your car. An example of this is, I'm sure it happened to me at least, when your parents would give you some of the car keys to play with. You maybe press the button a few times, and that's actually the biggest concern as to why you might DOS your car. And if you come back into range, you can see there that the key has generated the value or the rolling code value 8, and the car is going to see, do I have 8 in my rolling window? Yes, I do, so it's going to unlock the car. Now, of course, in real life, it's not going to be these integers. It's going to be randomly generated numbers. Now, the big note here, because we have a rolling window of valid answers, this is basically having a list of valid passwords for your car. You can't make that list too large, otherwise the attacker would have a higher likelihood of actually guessing the correct answer to your car. So that's why the rolling window can't actually be too big. But now, what happens when we go beyond the actual rolling window? Well, if you do that, that's going to desync the key and the car, and then you're going to cause a denial of service. So we can see here for the key fob's generating the rolling code 15, and that 15 value is not inside of the rolling window, therefore the car didn't unlock. This unfortunately happened to me. I DOSed a principal consultant's car in my very first year at the company, which made me extremely scared. I think this was literally just after I passed probation, so it was a very stressful time for me. Basically what happened was I was really getting into this radio frequency hacking, and I asked everyone, hey, can I hack your car? And they basically said no. Apart from this one principal consultant, he said yes, of course, and sort of just a little bit of context, he would park in the basement. So the basement cars are obviously out of range of the actual key fobs. So I was sitting there in the office playing around with the key, pressing the button, trying to sort of analyze the signal structure. And afterwards, I asked him, hey, can we maybe go down? Just want to test one of the attacks. We went down, and a lot of people were interested, so we actually brought the group down to the basement, and we attempted the attack, and it didn't work, and we were like, oh, okay, nothing happened, cool. And then Christo just wanted to make sure that the car's actually still locked, pressed the button, nothing happened. So at that stage, my heart sank because I broke a PC's car, and I'm just barely out of probation. Luckily, there is something we can do to actually resync the key fob and the car. So here's some of the things that we looked into, and the first one was essentially performing something akin to a mechanical ritual. We looked at the car's manual, and it gave us like a 20-step list of how to put your car in debug mode, and then you put the key near the ignition, and that's going to resync the car somehow. We tried that, lights started flickering in the car, and it didn't work, unfortunately. Luckily, the PC still had a manual key, so he could open up the car, start the car, and drive home. Of course, he was a little bit frustrated, but he's one of the kindest people, so he didn't show it. Because that would have meant that he might have had to go to the dealership where they do the ritual for you, for a fee. And that's the problem that sort of stressed me out. So luckily, when he went home, he started playing around with the car itself to try and get it back in working condition. He used the spare key, and then that unlocked the car, so that worked, okay. And then he used the original key again, and now the original key started working again. That meant that there's some type of built-in feature that allows you to resync the key fob and the actual car. That sounds awesome, right? But wait. Rolling codes were designed to prevent an attacker from replaying older rolling codes, and rolling codes were also built so that attacker can't guess future rolling codes. That's the rolling window. But now we have a built-in feature that allows us to resync the car to a specific rolling code. Can't we use those built-in features to resync to an older rolling code? In comes the rollback attack. So the rollback attack concept is essentially you would intercept or capture consecutive rolling code signals and then replay that to the car. Once the car recognizes the consecutive signals, the car is going to see, okay, you gave me 2 consecutive signals, for example, and I'm going to unlock them. So if you can look at how that might look from an attacker perspective, let's say we have the attacker waiting in a parking lot in a bush or something like that, and then the owner is coming back to their car wanting to unlock and drive away. The owner is going to unlock their car, but then the attacker is going to jam the vehicle from hearing the signal, but then also capturing the owner's key fob signal. Then the owner's, of course, just going to press the button again, thinking maybe the battery is a little bit flat. And then after that, the attacker captures another signal. So this is their second consecutive signal. And this time they don't jam the car and let the user unlock the car and drive away. At this stage, the attacker would have 2 consecutive rolling codes with them, and whenever they replay it, it's actually going to unlock the car. So for my POC I'm going to show you here is the same vulnerability isn't associated with all cars, but unfortunately my mom's Mazda is. So, well, that was, I guess, lucky from my perspective because it allowed me to do a little bit more research. And essentially with the Mazda CX-5, you have to capture 3 consecutive signals. So in this case, we have 3 rolling codes consecutively. And when I replay that signal to the car is going to see, okay, you gave me 3 consecutive rolling codes. I'm going to perform the very last action you gave me, which is an unlock action. Just note that these signals were actually captured in 2022, and the demo I'm showing you was, I think, a video last weekend. So here you can see laptop on the car, 1, 2, 3, and the car unlocks. Just another one, 1, 2, 3, car unlocks. So that's sort of the idea of a rollback attack. Now, of course, you need to trick the victim into actually capturing those 3 signals. But as I mentioned earlier, some of the cars actually only make use of 2 consecutive signals for this rollback attack to work. Looking at some of the mysteries of the rollback attack itself is, does the signals have to be consecutive, the consecutive signals? Not always, no. So for most cars, yes, they do actually have to be consecutive, but some of the car models allow you to just have 2 rolling codes. Doesn't even matter when you've actually captured them. Then you can unlock them. That's relating to the first column, or first row, sorry, of that table, where the rollback attack is called loose, and you only need 2 signals to actually do it. This is terrifying, because now the attacker just have to capture two signals doesn't even have to be consecutive. Whereas the more common one is going to be the third row, where the rollback attack requires you to capture 3 consecutive signals, like the Mazda CX-5. Another one that's quite common for, well, I guess, a car that's vulnerable to the second column one is the Hyundai i20. And this is kind of horrific because this is a common car for a lot of people to have. And another thing to emphasize with these type of vulnerabilities, you can't do a patch. You can't just send an update to the car and it's not going to happen anymore. So that's one thing that I'd want to highlight with sort of all the automotive security concerns that I'm highlighting here. Then, how many consecutive signals do I need? I did mention sometimes it's 2 to 5. And then, is this just for unlock and lock? No, it's not. So if your car has the feature to actually start the engine through the remote, as long as you captured, or as long as the last signal you've captured has the start engine action inside of it, it's going to start the actual car. Something that I've seen before is attackers basically showing a POC where they would roll down the windows, open the door, start the car, and will, of course, drive away. So the rollback attack is quite an awesome attack for attacking the car's actual rolling codes. And this made me a little bit more interested because what other type of attack vectors are there? And then I noticed that, wait, the signals aren't actually encrypted. I had an initial assumption that all these signals that I'm viewing is encrypted and there's not even a need for me to look at this stage because I'm still starting. Turns out, no, definitely not. Most of the signals aren't encrypted. So far, ironically, the Mazda key fob that I've tested, that's the only key fob that I've seen so far that is encrypted. Not saying, of course, there's a lot of key fobs that aren't, but everything that I've tested so far hasn't been encrypted. Now, because it's not encrypted, it of course allowed me to look into the actual signal structure a lot more in depth. Here we can see an extract of an actual key fob's signal, and we can see its data structure sort of just giving us all the information there. It's built out of the header, 1 frame, off time, subheader, and 2 frame. And I can see it's 380 milliseconds. That's how long the signal is and how long it takes to actually transmit. But after looking a little bit more into the actual structure of the signal, I noticed that we only need half of the signal to perform the action. This is because the key fob actually sends the signal twice, and I've seen this with quite a lot of key fobs, where instead of sending it once, being a long signal, it basically sends it twice, and this allows us to reduce the transmitting time to half of the original value. So this is going to be, in this case, 190 milliseconds. This is going to become more evident a little bit later. Now, since I only need half of the signal, I'm going to look at the data structure being sent from header and then the 1 frame. So the header is basically a constant value that's sort of just telling the car, hey, wake up, I'm sending you a signal. The user code is the actual key fob ID. So with each key fob, you're going to have a specific ID, and this might be related to your spare key and your main key. Then the ID code, that's your car ID, so each car is going to have its own ID. Because, for example, let's say you're a manufacturer and you have 10 cars there. How does the car know which key belongs to him? And that's through this type of method where each car is going to have its own car ID. Then we have the function code, and this is the code that tells the car what type of action to perform. Usually, of course, you have your unlock and lock, but if you have a little bit more fancy car, you can do the boot open or start the engine, rolling down the windows, those type of things. Now, rolling code we have already discussed. This is a randomized value that's sent along the signal to make each signal unique. And then the parity code is something that's just calculated based on the actual signal that you're sending. With this said, I was thinking, if I'm able to plan a brute force attack on this actual key fob signal, I would be able to unlock all of the cars of the specific model. So I tried to think, okay, what's the feasibility of a brute force attack? And I found, okay, we've got the header, function code, and the parity code, which we can determine already. So for example, the function code is usually in this case, it was, I think, 4 bits or so, and then that's something you can determine beforehand. Now looking at the rest of the bits, I need to try and brute force. Looking at the amount of combinations it's going to take me, in company with the amount of combinations times the time it takes to send the actual signal. So it's 380 milliseconds divided by 2 because we only need half of the signal. It's going to take me, I can't say that number, that many seconds. And that's not feasible, of course. So then I thought to myself, but the signals are unencrypted. So what if I perform a targeted brute force? So in this case, I'm going to intercept the victim's signal, of which I can capture their user code and ID code. Now I only need to determine, or I guess brute force, the rolling code value, which is only 12 bits. And in this case, I can do it under 13 minutes. From this point on, I was like, okay, this is already some good results, but can I do better? So I looked at the rolling code, trying to find any type of predictability or things like that, looking at the patterns, and I noticed that this specific key fob increments their rolling code with 2 each time. So that's, of course, not random and not what you're supposed to do. And in this case, once I intercepted or captured the victim signal, I just +2 by the rolling code, make sure I calculate the parity code correct, and I can instantly unlock the car. Now, this specific vulnerability is, of course, literally going against the whole spec of what is meant to be a rolling code. Just sort of as a summary of the things that we've already discussed with the attack surface in key fob communication, talking about replay attacks, but this is mostly mitigated by the rolling codes. Then you can just use the rollback attack to bypass all of the rolling code security controls. Then, because the key fobs are unencrypted, it allows attackers to actually analyze the signal to try and find patterns with it. Then looking at the rolling code itself, the rolling codes are a lot like your OTPs if you want to take it to application security, right? So all of the OTP type vulnerabilities is going to be applicable to the actual rolling code being sent. What's the brute force ability around the rolling code, and what's the predictability about the rolling code? And if we talk about replay attacks, that is the rolling code being invalidated or not, those type of things. So after looking at all of the rolling codes, I was suddenly stopped in my research and was asked to investigate an incident. So no, this isn't really, for client or cyber incident, whatever. Just someone asking me, hey, I found some CCTV footage of a few criminals stealing a car. Can I figure out how it happened? Because it seemed a little bit strange. Looking into the actual video, just to sort of set the scene, I wasn't allowed to actually share that video with everyone today, but explaining it at least I can. What happened was the victim parked at a parking lot, and there were shops in front of him, climbed up the car, made sure his car actually was locked. This is, I guess, the horrible thing of it. He even did the pull check, and then went into the shop. We noticed that a car stopped behind them. One guy climbed out of the car, followed him into the shop, and then another guy stood at the actual car door. Suddenly the car door opens, guy climbs in, and then the guy drove away. Shortly after, the person following the victim inside of the shop also ran out, and then of course they just sort of drove away together. And I thought to myself, how is this possible? So I started looking into the actual car, noticed that the car is making use of keyless entry and keyless start, so trying to look at that technology, and I found out the type of attack they were doing is called a relay attack. Now, the concept of a relay attack is essentially what you can see here on the diagram. We have one attacker standing at the actual car. When they pull that car door, the car is going to prompt a signal asking, is the key fob nearby? The attacker then takes that signal and essentially relays it to the other attacker, extending the range of communication. And then the second attacker grabs that signal and throws it to the key fob. the key fob's going to respond, of which the second attacker then grabs it and throws it back to the first attacker. In this case, the car is going to think as if the key fob is nearby. The same thing or same technology is used in keyless start. So they did the same attack twice just by following the victim. So the second attacker followed the victim essentially into the shop with a relay device in their hand, just stood near the person, and the whole relay attack happened extremely quickly, and they drove away. In this case, or the diagram over here, is an illustration of how it can be done if the key fob is inside of your house. And here I actually have some CCTV footage. This I can show, it's just on YouTube. And we'll see here how the whole attack is being performed under, I think, 1 minute and 20 seconds. So we can see the attackers sort of stop there, and it's 2 of them climbing out, very non-stressful there. And the one attacker, you can see they've got the devices in their hands. One attacker stands near the car, and the other attacker goes near the house. And what they're doing is they are putting the devices one near the car and the one near the house, so that they're relaying the signal of the keyless entry into the house. The key fob's going to respond, and the car's going to unlock. This allows them to just go into the car. Now, funny enough, the second attacker forgot we need to hack the keyless start as well. And like, why aren't you driving away? He came back, oh yeah, okay, we need to actually hack the keyless start. Doing the same type of thing. The attacker inside of the vehicle is currently pressing the brake, which signals the car to actually transmit the signal, and then the car is going to start. See here, there it starts, and the other guy runs away, and both of them just simply drive away. So in this case, this attack, of course, only works properly if the key fob is maybe near or near the actual wall, because at that point, the relay device has to send the signal through a wall, hoping that the key fob is in range, and the key fob has to respond back again. Another version of this attack I've seen is attacker, instead of using a sophisticated relay device, they simply took copper wires and made a very large circle and essentially hold that against the wall, and it actually still worked. So the funny, or I guess not funny, but the very interesting part about the relay attack, apart from how dangerous it is, because we're not exploiting a vulnerability, or we're exploiting the way the signals work with the car. So you're exploiting the actual technology, because all they're doing is extending the range of communication. And when I spoke to a few researchers on LinkedIn talking about this attack, and they were sort of living in Europe, and the interesting part there is that there where they live, they don't have walls, like we saw in the videos, there's no fence, there's no walls, so the car is outside for everyone to see. Then the attackers resort to this type of attack, where they relay the signal through a wall. In South Africa, that's a little bit less feasible, because we usually have gates and walls and things like that. It's a little bit more common. So in South Africa, the attackers had to resort to following the person to perform this relay attack. So it's just very interesting to think about how attackers has to adapt and evolve to different scenarios, but still performing the same attack. So now we're going to look into the defense against relay attacks, and something that the manufacturers essentially said initially is switch the feature off. I mean, yes, switching off the server does allow the attackers not to hack it, but in this case, you're switching a feature off that you've paid for. So this doesn't make sense. The secondary point there is making use of a Faraday pouch. And we can see an image of it. It's essentially a pocket you can put your key fob in, and this is going to block all signals from entering it. This isn't very useful if you do this having it in your pocket if you're going to the shops, because that's akin to switching off the feature, right? But this pocket would have helped the previous video of the attack, because the key is at rest, right? If you were to place your key fob inside of that pocket, putting that maybe on your coffee table, the attackers wouldn't have been able to perform the attack we saw in the video. But now the problem comes in, what do we do when we're in motion and we want to keep the feature? And that's the last point over there, key fob response time detection. And this is actually a sort of remedial action or mitigation that I thought, well, I wouldn't say I thought of it, but rather it's something I would pursue and recommend we sort of do a little bit more research on. The key fob response time detection, what it does, it's literally working around the concepts of a radar, where all we do is we look at the time it takes for the car to prompt, is the key fob near me? The attacker is going to relay that, going to hit the key fob's going to respond, and then send the signal back. So all the car has to do is the car just needs to start essentially something like a timer when the car is prompting where is the key. Time the whole signal roundabout distance and time that it's going to take, and then you can calculate that. If it's taking too long, then you can just reject the actual signal. This is a nice way to allow the car not to be vulnerable to relay attacks, and then combining this with the Faraday pouch, your car won't be vulnerable to the attack when your key fob is at rest at home and when you're in motion. One of the problems that we've seen with sort of looking into this type of remedial action is that key fobs don't respond consistently enough to actually make this work. But at that point, when we started looking at that, we sort of stopped for now, because it's sort of like the key fob technology has to get a little bit better in terms of the type of tech they're using in the key fobs to allow this to work. So we've spoken about quite a bit of automotive security and all of its attacks surrounding it, but let's talk about some of the more basic RF attacks out there to show you the attack surface or the remaining attack surface. Now, all of the attacks I'm going to show now, just going to briefly talk about it. It's not something that I've explicitly looked into, or rather I haven't performed the attack. And some of the topics we're going to look into is RFID and NFC communication and more. So you'll notice already there's going to be similar sort of attack surface points that we mentioned earlier with the automotive security, but of course for your normal RFID and NFC attacks as well. So we're going to look at, for example, replay attacks. This is the ability of an attacker to take the signal and then replay it. Let's look at your building access control. If an attacker gets to a point where they can actually capture the signal, now of course this is kind of hard because with access control you have to be this close to capture it. Point is, it's still theoretically there, where if they maybe put some type of receiver on top of the actual reader and you go and use your access control card to enter a door, they would be able to intercept the signal and potentially replay it. Eavesdropping, so this is literally performing something like a man-in-the-middle attack, but the nice thing about this attack is you're not sort of in the middle and passing the data through, you're just listening for all of the signals to come to you, and then you can read the data. This is the very harsh thing if your signals aren't being encrypted, because that means the attacker could read the signals and potentially read some sensitive data inside of it. A lot of the access control cards actually have user information inside of the actual key card, and that's going to send things related to that user which an attacker could get. Also, this is related to your credit cards and banking cards. Luckily, they are making use of encryption, so that's good, but that's of course something to look at whenever you're looking at that sort of attack surface. Now, with relay attacks, I think I sort of mixed the two over there. The first point on the relay attack is the one we just discussed, where we're extending the communication of the actual devices. Now, this is going to affect anything that makes use of radio signals. You can do the same thing on Wi-Fi. You can do the same thing, for example, with your key fobs that we just discussed. With access control, relay attacks is also possible. Let's say you have a device that can listen in on your access control that sort of mimics the access control reader, right? You have one attacker standing at the server room that maybe takes the access control card, another attacker having coffee with one of the employees. Now with that, you're going to extend the actual communication from the RFID reader, and RFID readers basically pings every few seconds, or actually almost every half second, to see if there is a card there or not. And then the attacker can just grab that signal, throw it to the guy having the coffee, and then perform the relay attack again on access control cards. Now that's of course very relevant to building or offer security as well. And now looking at maybe something with replay attacks, we spoke about key fobs, access control cards, but what about other things? What about eToll? There was a bunch of attacks that happened a few years ago where attackers would grab the eToll signal coming from the boom gate. So that eToll device is going to send a signal back to your car, and it's going to ask, or essentially asking, hey, who is here? And the car's eToll device is going to respond back to with their specific information, and with that information, the eToll gate is going to allow you to go through, and of course the deduction is going to happen on your account. But what an attacker could do is grabbing that RFID reader's signal and then replaying that to, let's say you're going to a parking lot, you know the RFID or the e-tag devices are sort of here in your rearview mirror. Then the attacker replays it to that device. The car is actually going to respond, well, not the car, the actual device there. And then the attacker is going to grab these signals. They can do this for a whole parking lot, essentially grabbing all the signals, and then whenever they go to eToll Boomgate, they can just replay your signal, and the victim is paying for you. Of course, that's some high-level dedication just to not pay eToll, right? Then, of course, card cloning, and this is a little bit different from replay attacks, because with a replay attack, you are capturing the raw signal and replaying that signal. Whereas with card cloning, you are looking at how the card data has been read onto the actual card and mimicking the same process. So you can actually write data to your own cards, and you have your own physical access card that you can use. With the last thing I wanted to point out here, with the relay attacks, I mentioned that some of these attacks are also related to banking cards and things like that. The relay attack, once again, extending the range of communication, it works on tap to pay. So if an attacker finds a way to maybe insert a device on a payment, a POS device, they would be able to extend the communication so they are at the payment device, and then another attacker is just following you. If your wallet maybe doesn't have one of those RFID or signal blocking sheaves inside of them, the attacker can take the signal from the actual POS device, throw it to the card's going to respond back, and the attacker relays that whole communication and actually make the payment go through. All of this information is also on like publicly resourced places, so that's, if you're interested, can take a look at that. But one thing I want to mention is, of course, I know a lot of these attacks are quite severe, especially with the relay attack I mentioned just now of making payments. We don't really condone looking into it or exploiting any of this. And some other type of attack surface that we can look at is in the radio frequency hacking realm. What is a denial of service? And that's where jamming attacks would come in. Jamming attacks can affect any device that makes use of radio signals. So if the device is reliant on receiving data through radio communication, you would be able to jam that device. Examples on the automotive security side, attackers can jam your unlock or lock function. We all know this to be common at your garage stations, where you would climb out of the car and you want to lock your car, but then an attacker would jam it. And in terms of jamming it, you just need a device transmitting on the same frequency of the receiver. So they can do it with the garage remote, sort of just hitting the button in and then jamming your car from listening to the key fob sending the signal. The same type of thing affects your keyless start as well. So let's say you get into your car and you want to, like there's some criminals running up to you trying to rob you, you want to drive away. They can start jamming your car and disallow you from essentially driving away. This is, of course, only if you've forgotten that you can fall back to the manual start again, which in all fairness, with my mom's Mazda, I have no idea how to do the manual start. I only know the brake pedal and pressing the button. So I would be extremely vulnerable to whoever tries this type of attack. Then with the same type of thing, your GPS trackers can also be affected by jamming attacks. So an attacker could steal your car, perform a jamming attack on the actual frequencies of that GPS tracker, and then your tracking company won't be able to actually know where your car is. I want to note there that car trackers are actually trying to make their tech a little bit more sophisticated. So they're using something called frequency hopping, where they don't transmit on just one frequency, they sort of hop between them. But if the attacker has enough equipment, they can just jam all the frequencies. Of course, Wi-Fi cameras will be affected as well. This was a big thing in some of the restaurants in Pretoria, where attackers would steal cars or things out of cars in parking lots, and the attacker would essentially buy a jammer and just jam the cameras there, because if you're using a Wi-Fi camera and not doing a wired connection whatsoever, the Wi-Fi camera is going to disrupt because the communication is going to disrupt, and the feed will essentially shut down. So this was a common attack vector that they used to steal cars or things out of cars. Same thing is going to apply to office Wi-Fi. Let's put you in a scenario that an attacker buys a bunch of jamming devices, and they throw it maybe onto your roof, or they hide it in your office. How would you resolve that? How would you find the jammer? How would you know your Wi-Fi is being jammed? We don't have anything to do that. We don't have jamming detectors in our offices, right? Of course, I haven't heard of anyone performing this type of attack, so of course, in terms of statistics, probably not the best way to invest in something like that, but this is the type of thing that can happen when we're looking at jamming attacks. Of course, same thing with the office access control. Let's say there's a sensitive door or room that you can go in, and then the attacker would then jam the actual RFID reader, and that's going to allow your whole IT team not to access that door. And if maybe at that stage they have to resolve to a more manual method, that's when the attacker could jump in and get into the sensitive room as well. So some of my final remarks here is the whole talk, we mentioned a bunch of attacks on radio frequency hacking, but the idea was sort of to show you my journey as to how I went about it and things that I found, some of the mistakes I made, and also to give you some insight as to what it means to look at radio signals, hoping to actually give some security awareness that these signals that fly around everywhere are actually quite hackable. And at this stage, because they're not even using encryption that much, sort of tells you how far behind they could be. So thank you. This is going to be my last slide, and thank you for listening to Robin hacking Airwaves. The suite over there is Airwaves. Thank you, everyone.